over at the whiteboard, you can see there's a big piece of paper that just summarizes tips and tricks on how to work in CAD. And I'm just going to take you through part of it. I don't think I'm going to have the time to take you through all of it, because I need to be out here by noon. So I'm going to start with this first half now, and then we will look at the second half and also just an example of how to get started on making headphones next time. If it's okay? Yeah, and feel free to interrupt and ask questions on the way. Yeah. So I know that actually quite few of you had any experience with Fusion from before when we started, and we just sort of gave you a crash course or just had you do stuff without any introduction, and that worked out, I think, surprisingly well. So now this is the introduction that you were never given, but it's more useful now that we will work with multiple components and assemblies, because we didn't do that in the first assignment. So these are just some tips and tricks on how to work effectively in CAD. Use them if you want. If you don't want to use them, that's totally okay. So this Mario board also, I will link to that on Blackboard, so you will get the Mario board as well. So I'm just going to take it like step by step here. So first thing I'd like to do to set up my CAD system is that you have this keystroke called S, and the S menu is super valuable. So if I hit S on my keypad, I get this. Let's just extrude and fillet. But let's say if I do a drawing like that, and I do this, and then I hit S, and then I get other commands as well. Cool thing about this is that I can search for, let's say I search for fillet, and then I can add that to my shortcuts here. This is very minimalistic now, and I think that's because I just updated Fusion and lost all of my shortcuts. But it's very practical. Like if you do, let's say you do, really did I lose everything? I lost every customization here now. Let's say you do sweep a lot, right? Then you can just put sweep on that menu, and then you hit S and then select sweep, as opposed to going up here and then selecting sweep from wherever it is. There it is. That saves you time. Like that saves you massive amounts of time moving your mouse this much as opposed to up and down here. So that's the S menu. The S menu is great. If you got a customizable mouse, which you probably do, you can open this program called Options, or you can open some other program. Here's my mouse. And then I can assign, you can see on my mouse, that button is S. So that means that I can, when I do CAD, I can open the S menu like this, and that saves me a ton of time. So I can just do that and then fillet and whatever. Okay? So that's my pro tip number one. That's the S menu. Super valuable. That also works in SolidWorks. Yeah. Gestures, these are really good in SolidWorks. They work very well. They don't work as well in Fusion, but they're still there. So if you're in Fusion and let's say you enter a drawing, then if I click my right mouse button and just hold it, and then I can move around, I will get this sort of cake menu. Okay? I don't know a way to customize this, so I don't use it a whole lot. I think it's kind of random what's on here, but it's there. Yeah. In Fusion, in SolidWorks, you can customize quite a bit, and it's very useful. So it's a shame that Fusion is not as good on that. 3D mouse. This is also super valuable because that frees up your hand to actually doing work. So let's say if I'm here, I do this extrude just to get something like that. Now I can use that hand to sort of navigate and do things, and that frees up my other hand to manipulate this object, right? Saves me a ton of time. Okay, so consider getting a 3D mouse. This is like 2,000 kroners, that's like 200 euros. And you can probably sell it used also for the same price. So if you plan on using CAD, I would highly recommend getting a 3D mouse. Okay. Revision handling is a problem in SolidWorks. It's not a problem in Fusion because Fusion has this built in. When I do external files, I never say like print or final or anything. I just keep running numbers. So you can see here's an example of a project I did with a client. It's just like running numbers like revision 15, revision 16, and so on. It's totally okay to have revision 900 and something. It's also very good to have revision 900 and something, because if I send off a file to a supplier and it says _915, there is absolutely no doubt that he has that one file. Because otherwise you will have to go to date, or you have to go to like, this is the final print, whatever. Just do running numbers. Fusion does this quite neatly. Here you can see this is revision 10. Perfect. So every time I save, it just bumps revision, which is great. In case let's say you do some changes. Let's say I did something changes on revision 10, but I didn't really like that. Or maybe Sunniva did something unintentionally on revision 8. Might have happened. You can see here that someone else has saved this. Then I can make this the present model by opening it like this. And then I can go here, and then I can say save as latest. Oh, that's grayed out for some reason. Probably some privileges I don't have. But then you can use save as latest, and then it will take revision 7 and call that revision 11, and you will sort of just eliminate all of the changes in between. So revision handling works very well in Fusion. Okay, so let's start talking about sketching. Like, it's what I sort of want to convey to you guys is that the normal way, of course, to do stuff in CAD is that you make a sketch and then you do extrude or revolve or sweep or whatnot. But you will benefit greatly from reducing the number of sketches and also from doing things in other ways than sketching and then doing some operation. So that's sort of why I made this cheat sheet, is just to show you like all of the alternatives to sketching and doing operations that are out there. So let's start by making a sketch. I'm not going to use this. I'm not going to use that. I'm going to go all the way back. And then, first of all, since we're in Fusion, I'm going to make a new component. Component equals thing. So feel free to use components as much as you like. If you make, let's say you make a headset, everything should be its own component. It just makes it a lot easier for you. So I'm just going to do my first test component. I'm going to make a square. Square is rectangle. If I hit R on my keyboard, that instantly goes to rectangle command, and then I can just select which plane I want to sketch on. So I don't know, when I go into a sketch, I very seldom hit like create sketch and then select the plane. I'd rather select the command, the first command in the sketch I'm making. If I'm making a circle, that's a C, enters sketch mode instantly, right? If I hit L, that's line. Same thing happens. If I hit R, that's rectangle. Same thing happens. Okay. So try and not click create sketch and then make the sketch. Just hit like line or circle or rectangle or whatnot. So let's start with line this time. Line. Then I get to choose which plane I want to sketch at. So I'm going to sketch at, let's say we do the left plane. And then I start making stuff. So let's do this. Do you know this trick? How to do that? Okay, you need to know that trick. When I make a line, L is line. If I just do this and that just gives me a line, and I continue making lines, right? If I left click and hold, that's going to give me a tangent curve, which is nice. Okay. There's also a trick, I think, if you take like any part of the line and then you click and hold, that's going to give you a normal line. That's pretty cool, right? Okay. So those are the line tools, and also I use the S menu in case I want to do things. I'm just going to delete that. That's the little line trick. Left click and hold. Project. This one is useful. So let's say I make some geometry first. I'm just going to take this and delete it, and then make new. I'm just going to extrude something. Come on, you can do it. Yeah. And then I'm going to make a new sketch. Let's say I'm going to make a new plane and then a new sketch. So I'm going to do this. Offset like that. Okay. And now I'm up here. I'm going to sketch something else. I'm going to make a circle on that plane, right? So let's see. I'm going to make a circle like that. If I want that geometry onto this plane, I use the project command. Project is It just resets my settings. That's annoying. Look at, don't look at. For some reason, Fusion just decided to reset everything today, but okay. So if I want this geometry onto that plane, I hit P for project, and that gives me that geometry, right? Super useful. P is project. I can also project just parts of it, like those two lines, if that's what I want. Okay? If I constrain something, let's say I make a line like this. If I want that line to be, let's say I want this to be on that line, it should be able to know, if you do the settings right, it should be able to auto project and get that into your sketch. Auto project, there we go. So if I do this, it's still not doing it. Okay, then I need to manually pick it up and then align the two. Yeah. Okay. Project gets stuff into your drawing. Trim. Trim is T for trim. Let's say I want to have some perimeter. Let's say I want this circle to sort of be, I just want this part of the circle. Then I can use T for trim, and then I can just do that and that. And now I just trimmed it. I cannot trim projected geometry. I can only trim my own geometry. The opposite of trim is extend. Trim is T, right? That just cuts it back. If I have a line like this and I trim it, it will just cut it back to the next intersection, right? The opposite of that is extend. Let's say I have a line like this. If I now do extend, like that should be on there. So I do this, I do extend. That will extend it to the next intersection. That is super useful. So trim and extend. Let's talk about constraints and dimensions. I'm just going to finish up this sketch. Come on, you can do it. I'm just going to kill that. Going to give you a little shortcut as well, since mine is reset. I use space to finish sketch because I do that so often. So that's my shortcut for exiting sketches, is space. So if I hit the space bar, that just takes me out of the sketch. So let me just make something. Let me just take this and just extrude it down to this. Yeah, I just made something. I don't know what it is. Doesn't matter. Yeah. Let's talk about sketching and making robust sketches. So when I have a sketch like here, you can see that that's a blue sketch, and that's a blue sketch, and that's really bad. You should always have black sketches with black lines and padlocks on them. And the reason for that is, the reason why this is blue in the first place is that it's not fully constrained. So let's go back on that and have a look at it. So if I pull something here, it's all over the place, right? So let's say I want to fully constrain the sketch. That means that I need to give it some dimensions. D is dimensions. So I'm just going to hit D, and then maybe this is 80. Maybe this is, come on, you can do it, 100, like that. Now you can see it gets a little padlock on it. That means it's safe, okay? So try and avoid this. Sometimes when you work with splines and text, it's really difficult to get fully constrained sketches. But as a general rule, you should try and get fully constrained sketches. Now, if I go back to the sketch, and let's say I want to have a hole in the center, right? Dead in the center. There are a couple of ways to do that. Let's say I make a hole like that. One way I could do it, of course, I can do it like completely manually. I can say that, okay, 80 divided by 2 is 40, and 100 divided by 2 is 50, right? That's valid. Nothing wrong with that, okay? What's a better way? Because this is really bad. If I change the dimensions here, this is not going to follow. So what's a better way? Yeah?
I guess you can make like 2 lines.
Yes. I can actually just make 1 line. Yeah. Let me show you the slightly better way first. The slightly better way is to double click this, 50, and then I click this one, which is 100. That gives me a reference to that, and then it's divided by 2. That's quite okay, right? And this 40, this is just that, divided by 2. So if I change this to 120, that follows. That's fairly okay, but the line is way better. So when you do sketches, try and minimize the number of dimensions and still make your sketch fully constrained. And if you have multiple dimensions that are the same, it's a good idea to just double click the other dimensions. Let's say you have like 3 circles. You could, of course, use the equal constraint like that. Let's say you do equal. That's going to make them equal. But if for some reason that you cannot use the equal constraint, then you can always add a constraint like that. You can double click that constraint and just reference the other constraint. That's better. But also in the interest of minimizing dimensions, it is better to just do, let's say we want this to be at the center. I will just do a line from here to here. That's a line, and it's not, oh, it's going somewhere. I need to constrain it. Now it's black, so now it's not going anywhere. Of course, I don't want this to interfere with my geometry, so I'm going to make it a construction line. And I do that by selecting it and hitting X. Then it becomes dashed. And you can see it no longer affects the sketch profile. If I do this, that's 2 different profiles. If I just make construction geometry of it, it's not visible anymore. But I still haven't constrained this circle, right? But I can do this. I can select center, and then I can select that, and then I can do the midpoint constraint. That's dead on. And also it saves me a couple of dimensions. Yeah?
Can you not do that without the line? Just to select both objects and center them?
I'm not sure. So if I center something on something else, typically I center something on a line. Yeah. So it's not like a regular constraint. I don't think let's try it. Let's try and delete that. If I select this corner, that corner, and that corner, and then center.
Yeah, or the whole shape.
That's a good question. Maybe I can. Because I can center for sure. I can center circles. Yeah. But I think when you do that, no, I cannot do that because centering is on points. So I can try it though. Let's say we select that and then we select this. It's not letting me. But I could do something else. Let's say I make another circle here. I could say that it's concentric. Yeah. So if that's concentric, that's just going to center them on the shape. But really, that does the same thing as centering the points. But sometimes you will have part of a circle that it makes sense to use concentric anyhow. But point is, try and use constraints. Like you have constraints, like you have a lot of these constraints. If I select one thing, select another thing, and then I right-click, I get all the available constraints for those 2. It's the same as if you were to go up here and pick it here, but this is very inefficient. It's a lot faster to just select one thing, select the other thing, and then select tangent, for instance.
So you're doing a right-click there?
Right-click, yes, to get that menu. So constraints as much as you can, minimize the use of dimensions, but at the end of the day, you want padlocks on your sketches. Okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's all the sketch-related things. Let's talk about how to do stuff with as few operations as possible. So, of course, when the problem of having multiple sketches or a number of sketches is not when you make the first design. The problem occurs when you modify that design. Because it's so easy to get a broken link. Like you have some sketch that refers to something, and then you modify something, and then that falls apart, and then you need to manually remap everything. So it's more robust. Your model will be more robust if you just minimize the number of sketches and try and use other operations to accomplish the same thing as you would normally do with a sketch and an extrude, for example. Okay? So I'm going to give you a couple of examples on how to minimize sketches. So I'm just going to hide that, and then I'm going to make myself a new component like that. So let's say I want, let's just continue with this box we had. I'm just going to make something here, just like a center rectangle with a circle. And then I'm going to extrude. Now, of course, I can make something like I can make, that's a base, and then I can unhide the sketch. And then I can extrude again, and I can select. If I left click and hold, it gives me options of all the things I can select. Of course, I could manually like flip it over and select that. But since I'm just here and I'm lazy, and just do select, and then I left click and hold, and it gives me the profile and then I can extrude again. Maybe I'll just start object here, and then maybe we'll just go upwards like that. So that's two different profiles on the same sketch. Totally okay. Okay. Let's say I want this thing to have a special shape. Let's say I want this thing to do, I want it to have a step outward again. So I can add a circle here, and I can do this, like that. And then I can continue doing this, but this is actually bad practice what I'm showing you now, but I want to show it to you anyway. From object, from here, and then going up, and then join. Okay, so now I made something circular, but I made the circular thing by extruding a circular profile, and that's really bad. That's a definite no. You don't want to do that. And the reason you don't want to do that is that you get so many extrude operations. You get one for like each alteration. So how can I do this in fewer steps? Yeah. Yes, I can do that. And whenever you are making, let's say you make a screw tower or anything, if you end up in a situation where you do one extrude with one profile and then you do another circular extrude one profile, don't do it. It's a lot better to go back. And then, of course, the cost of this is that I will have to do another sketch, but it's still worth it. If I do another sketch like that, it keeps locking me in for some reason. That's a setting that I need to fix. So then you make an axis, and then you make your revolve profile. Yeah. And then you can do like multiple things with that profile. Yeah. If I want a nice interface towards this block, I can use intersect. So that's intersect, this one. So if I use intersect, then that's going to give me a line just where that intersects. And that's also going to close off. Come on, it should do it. Intersect that. Okay. And that's going to give me a closed profile as well. So now I can finish this, and then I can do revolve, right? I can do that. It's called axis of revolution in SolidWorks. Sounds very impressive. The axis of revolution. Okay. Okay, so now I've done this in 2 sketches and 1 revolve operation, which is a bit better than 1 sketch and 2 operations, perhaps. How can I do it even more effectively? Oh, it's beginning to be quite hard. I think I can do this in 1 sketch, and I don't know how many operations. Let's just play with it. First of all, I'm having something that's symmetric here. You should never model symmetry from scratch. You should always like add symmetry at the very end. And the reason for that is that when you do symmetry, if you have a fillet on one side, it's so easy to like lose that fillet on the opposite side. And also adding 20 fillets is twice as much work as adding 10 and then mirroring. So when you do symmetrical stuff, do 1/2 first and then you mirror. Same goes for the headset, right? That's completely symmetrical, almost. So do one side first, mirror it, and then do the other. Okay? Yeah. So a few operations. In this example, I just used 1 sketch to do 2 things. But you get the idea. Try and minimize the number of sketches. Try and minimize the number of operations. Yeah. When you do symmetrical stuff or other things that has an obvious origin, make sure that that origin is always at the center. So for the headphones, that means that one cup should be like offset from the center because the other one is on the other side, right? Don't make one cup at the center of the model and then the other one is sort of out on some arbitrary space in area in space, right? Center it. Super important. You saw that also on the turf guns, right? It's so much easier to model around the center and mirror. Okay. Also, if you do AR, it's if you're strict on keeping your coordinates right, it's easy to get your AR model onto your phone without having to flip it around and do things. Yeah. Yeah. Offset planes. I think I showed you this one. If you're sketching something up here, of course, it's totally okay to just sketch on some flat surface. The benefit of doing that is that the contour of that flat surface, let's say this, also gives you the perimeter of whatever it is you're making. You don't have to like explicitly say that that's the outline. It sort of gets that, which is a nice little feature. If you ever need to, let's say I want to make some feature on the side here, then I would perhaps like to take that plane and then offset it. Oh, no, we're not doing that. We're taking that plane and then we're offsetting it to some distance, right? To get it exactly on here is actually a bit tricky. We can try and do that too. Let's say I use that sketch as reference. So I had a sketch here. If I unhide that, then I can take that plane and then I can offset it to object and then I can select that. That gives me that plane just at the right place. So if I start sketching here now, oh, that's not the right one. Don't do that. Yeah. Let's see if I sketch that. I got a feature called auto look at sketch, which is extremely annoying activated. And also it jumped back in time. We don't want to do that. Create sketch. Now we're talking. Yeah, so now I'm sketching at, where's my plane? Yeah, now I'm sketching at this plane, which is what I wanted. Let's say I want to make a hole on this side, like that. And then I can sort of drill a hole to the side, like this. I don't know. Okay, so offset plane is nice, and it's good practice to offset plane and then use some element in your model as reference to offset that plane. Yeah. So in terms of making things, there are multiple strategies you can use. One is you can make a solid and then you can shell it, and the other one is you can make a shell and then you can thicken it. Essentially, those are the two ways we get things with volume inside. Okay, so for the turf gun assignment, most of you did the solid and then no, actually you didn't even shell it. You just kept it solid, right? Yeah. So I'm going to show you. Let's try and model an like part of a headphone to do this. Yeah, so I'm just going to hide that again and make a new component. That. I think maybe I have no idea what happened to my Fusion today, but it's reset everything for some reason. And that's just really annoying. I'm going to switch off a couple of things. Yeah. So let's yeah, headphones. Let's make some sort of, I don't know, some sort of cup. And also I argue that we should not do we should not place one cup at the center, so I'm sort of gonna have to live by that. Now I'm looking at the front, that's the left, so maybe that's the front, so my cup should be out here. So the first thing I do is just to offset that plane and just move it out here. Let's say, I don't know how wide a head is, but let's say we move it up by 200 millimeters. And then I can make the contours of a headphone cup out here. Maybe it should be very crude and square-ish. I don't know. Like that. And then I could add some fillet to it. F is fillet. And then I can sort of select these and make some horrible boxy shape. If you want to refine your fillets, let's say we do 40. Can I do 40? I can do 40. That's a lot. You can also modify this and get curvature continuous fillets. The difference between tangent and curvature continuous is that on tangent fillet you'll just have like a straight line and then it turns into a curve of straight radius and then back to a straight line. If you do curvature continuous, that means that it's sort of like driving on a road. And when you come to a turn, if you're doing tangent, you just like flip your steering wheel over and then you flip back. On curvature continuous, you very easily like you turn in and then you turn out. I think the derivative is continuous on curvature continuous, which makes it look a bit more harmonic. So I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to add a fillet also out here, perhaps. So I'm just going to make a new group of fillets. Oh, I'm going to do that in separate operation. I'm just going to leave it. I'll just leave it. I'll do that first, and then I'll add another fillet. 30. That actually kind of looks like a headphone, almost, yeah. So, there are some things that I did here that are not very clever. First of all, this is also symmetrical, so I wouldn't have to do the entire thing. I could do half of it, right? So let's maybe we should just go back and do half of it. So let me just say that, okay, this is center, so I'm just going to pull that over. And then this one, I don't have to add a fillet on these two because that's where I'm going to mirror anyway. And then this guy, I can, let's see, I'm just going to take that off and then just add. Okay, cool. Half a headphone, okay? Maybe I can even cut it more, like I could also cut it that way. That would work too. Quarter a headphone, totally fine. Yeah, so provided that you want to do symmetrical stuff. But then again, you might not. Maybe I want to like tweak with this, so I'm just going to go back and not do that. So I'm back here again. So now I can use the shell command, of course, and then I can shell it. Not super impressive. I can make that 2 millimeters, and that's just a 2 millimeter shell, but that's the beginning, right? I can also, let's say I want to modify and make it a bit more interesting, the shape. I can go back, and I can I can use Q. No, that's press pull. Nope, I'm going to show you that later. I can move faces. I can I can just tweak it. It's a bit dirty, but it kind of works. So I'm just going to manually distort the faces a bit. Try and make something that's more interesting. This is not a good way of doing nice modeling. The nice way of doing this would be to use freeform, which you already know, right? It's just an example of how to work with solids and then getting shells out. Now this got angry because that's probably, yeah. And then I get something like this, okay? But this is a solid that becomes a shell, okay? So now I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to make a shell that becomes a solid. That should also be on the arrow here. Yes, so I'm going to use surface and thicken. Do you know how to do surface modeling? Yeah, some of it. Surface modeling is really useful if you deal with things that are surface-like in nature. Like if you do a box like this, it doesn't make sense to model it as a solid. Model it as a surface. And also, you could like manually do the insides and outsides, but you end up getting so many small faces, and it's really hard to do the details if you do that. So try and work with surfaces instead. So new component, and then let's find the origin there, and then let me just do the outline. I can do the same exercise as before. I can offset this by 200. And then I can do the outline of my model. Maybe I want to sweep it. Let's try and do that. So I'm just going to make a contour. That's going to make the. So this is my contour like that, and then maybe I want to make that contour a bit more interesting. So I'm just going to like nudge it a bit. I don't know. Maybe I'll add some fillets to it. There we go. Fillets. And then let's exit that, and then we can do another sketch that gives us the profile. Since this is intersecting now, I can just use that. And then I can try and get this. I can try and project.
How do you make this sketch constrained since there's no origin on this plane?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah. So how to constrain this sketch since there's no origin? There is an origin though. I got this little thing.
Okay.
Yeah. So if I can add a point, let's say I do point like that. Yeah. So if I add a point, I can place a point on the origin like that.
Yeah.
And then I can just do dimensions from that to this. But that's a good question. So now I wanted to make a separate profile. There are two ways of making that profile. First, I can just do, I can just use If I'm dead certain that I'm on like a straight stretch here, I can sketch on that. I can also do a 3D sketch and do the profile that way. Right? Now I just made things a bit more complicated for myself because I don't really know if these two sort of line up. I think they do, but I'm not sure. And also, since that comes at an angle, it is actually quite tricky for me to make a profile. So maybe I should 3D sketch instead. If you go back to the sketch environment, you can tick off this, which is called 3D sketch. And then as you hit L for line, you get this little thing. Let's see if I can see it. I'm going to try and show it outside of that. L for line gives you this little thing. If I hit the option key, this changes the planes that I make my line on, if that makes sense. So if I'm here, I'm on the blue plane here, right? So if I want to go forwards, I hit that twice, and then I can be here, and then if I want to go back up like that, I can hit that, and then I get some funny shape. Very three-dimensional, right? And that can be super confusing to work with, but it's also very useful. So for my case, where I want to do a profile that I'm going to sweep, and this has so many odd shapes, it's kind of difficult for me to make a plane and do something useful with it. So I'd rather just do a 3D sketch coming in from that point, going straight up, and then maybe I'll give it a bit of curvature, and then maybe some more curvature. Let's try and make it interesting, like that. Oh. And then just a straight finish like that. Yeah, that's some sort of profile, right? And then I can constrain this as well. I'm not going to fully constrain, but I can say that these two are perpendicular. So that's sort of my guarantee that that's going to be right. And then I also need to ensure that this is perpendicular and that it's actually, yeah, it's quite a job to fully constrain 3D sketches. Totally doable though. So that's my path, that's my profile, and now I really hope I'm lucky. I don't think I will include this. I will just make that construction geometry. And if I go to surface now, and I can do sweep, like that. That's my profile, that's my path, and now I'm really crossing my fingers. That's complete fuck up. Let's see. Don't chain. It's self-intersecting, which is a pain. Let's see if I can do it just with this. I can do it just with that. So that means that this radius, what's happening here is that this is probably too sharp, so it sort of collides on itself. That's what's giving me problems here. So I need to solve that in some other manner. I think maybe I'll try and solve that first. So let's try and make that a bit smaller. It would be nice to have that feature on there though. Let's try and redo it. Profile, path. Oh, it really doesn't want to do it. That's a shame though. Yeah. Sorry, that's sorry for making an interesting design. But yeah, I'm just gonna finish up the example anyhow. Profile, path, that gives me a sweep. Which is, I could make it a bit nicer though. I can make this a curve. That's going to be for sure more interesting than nothing. So if I do that, and then I'm just going to let it. Okay. Let's agree that this is at least it's better than just a straight line. Okay. So now I have some nice curvature going on, and then I can change this. And then my profile should be that. Profile. Oh! Okay. That's not horribly bad. I think I mixed profile and path previously. Maybe that's why it went wrong. I think that's what happened. Okay, so now I got this nice little curve thing. Now it's just a matter of patching up this, which is super quick. Just patch like that. So now I have two different sheet bodies, which I can combine. I can stitch them like that. Now I have one sheet body, and maybe I want to add some fillet to it, like that. And then, last but not least, I use thicken. And now, of course, I want to use thicken inwards because this is sort of the thing I sketched. So now, oh, I need to select that and then just 2 millimeters. Sometimes you will run into problems here as well. If the thing sort of self-intersects, you will have problems too. But now I also have a shell, right? Which is made in a very different manner than the previous shell, which was this is the massive shelled out. This is the refined like surface modeling and thicken, right? Please feel free to experiment with freeform when you do your headphone cups, because it tends to be very geometric looking if you do just like extrude operations or even things like this. It can look a bit crude. So try and play with freeform and make it that way. Okay? So surface and thicken, and that's shelling. I'm not going to have the time to do everything here. Extrude, you know. Multi-body parts, you don't really know. But I can show you. Maybe we should talk about components for the last 10 minutes, because that's a bit different in Fusion and in SolidWorks. So yeah, first of all, if we are to talk about components, I'm just going to promote my handbook. Just Google Dr. Martin's handbook. And then that, come on. There we go. Come on. Yeah. Then if you go to CAD Bootcamp, there is a section on components. And my own component commandments, call them what they want. But in essence, use them. You will have a very hard time if you don't use components. So I'm going to show you some really nice things about using components. First of all, here you can see that I've got 2 components in this. So if I go to the very top, I get like the full history tree of a lot of stuff that's happening, right? And it's kind of difficult for me to tell like which operation is which part here. It's virtually impossible, right? So what I can do, let me just hide that. That's in the way. More origins there. Yeah. So what I can do instead, I can hit Shift N, and then magic happens, right? You know this trick? Yeah. Shift N is the same as inspect and then display component colors. There was a bug a while ago that sort of made all your components transparent when you tried to do this. Maybe it was just on the Mac, but they solved it now after a year or so. So now you can see down here that my colors of these operations correspond to the parts here, which makes it quite easy for me to sort of understand that, okay, these things have to do with that part, the green stuff is there, and so on, right? So the pitfall of working with components is that it's so easy to be at the wrong location in the history tree or in the feature browser when you modify something. Make sure that if you want to modify this, make sure that you activate that part. That is super important. Because otherwise, if you don't activate that part, that means if you make a sketch here, let's say I make a rectangle on that surface, no 3D sketching anymore. If you make a sketch here, let's say I do this, right? It shows up and it joins this part, right? So now it sort of belongs to that. You see, it just eliminated everything else. Let's say I go back in time like that, and then I make the sketch up here. I can still make the same sketch. So sketch here, rectangle, and then extrude. But let's see, it still gives me the option to join. But the problem now is that you can see that this sketch is red, whereas the other one is green, right? So that means that this sketch is actually up here. And I don't want it to be up there. It has to do with this component. I want it to be down here. So that's why if you want a tidy model, make sure that you activate the right component before you start moving stuff. And sometimes you can drag and drop. If you're super lucky, you can do this. Okay, I was super lucky. Most of the time, that will not work. If you got a bit of complexity, that's not going to work. Yeah. So why components are great? First of all, it separates operation from each other. That's great. Yep. Second of all, you can make one component, or you can make an assembly of multiple components, and then you can just sort of pattern that. So if I want to do, let's say I want to pattern something. I go here. I can pattern component. I could pattern this and just give me an axle. And of course, this looks like the same as patterning a body, right? But imagine if this component held several other components inside, then you would have to like select all of those, and they're not really a group. But if you do the top level component, everything else will follow. Does that make sense? Yeah. Another really cool thing about components, especially now that you're making headphones, is something called as-built joint. If you want your sort of headphones to come to life, if you want to try out how the hinges work, that is actually really simple. If you do it, if you build it in Fusion and you have different components. So as-built joint is here. You go to assemble, and then you do not select joint. You select as-built joint, which is this one, that one. Yeah. So the difference between those two is that an as-built joint will let you move two stuff relative to each other only in the direction you specify. So you say that, let's say you have an axle and something else, then you can say, okay, I don't care about all of the other states of freedom. I just want you to treat it as an axle. So let's say I want this thing. Let's see if this thing should slide relative to that thing. Doesn't really make sense, but okay. If I do that, then I can do. Let's say if I want a slider joint. I need a snap like there. Yeah. It's just a super easy way of making joints between things. If I were to do this in SolidWorks, I would have to specify all degrees of freedom, right? You have to say, okay, you're not going to rotate in any direction and you're going to slide in this direction. The as-built joint is sort of an opposite. It just assumes that everything else is locked, and then it permits you to move the things that you permit to move. And that is super handy, and it's a very quick way of making functional assemblies. So the two things you need to know to use as-built joint, one is the joint itself, but if you have, let's say you have a component that holds other components, you might need to make a rigid group. You might need to sort of glue everything in that component together to make it work. And that's the rigid group command. So let's say you do these two, and then I can sort of select these. That just glues them together. And then if I do a joint, yeah, then let's see. That was the wrong order. That should be here. Yeah. So now, if I do this, yeah, that moves. These two stick together. They glue together. Okay. Just play with joints. But joints necessitates the use of components. You won't be able to do this just on bodies. You need components to make this work. Okay, so components are great in that you can separate operations, you can move parts that hold other parts, and you can make mechanisms that work. That's sort of the sales pitch. Okay, so just use them from day one. Sometimes it's kind of hard to determine when you want to introduce components. Let's say I have one sketch and that creates two components. Is that a question? Yeah.
How do you make a new component?
That's a good question. Let me go. I'm just going to exit here. There are different ways of making new components, and also there are different ways of activating them. Yeah. So now, in this example, I just made like one level. I have all the components are sort of made from the top level, right? So let me just hide all of this. V is hide, by the way. And then I have something else. That's just the body. That's not a component, but let's hide that too. And then I'm gonna hide the joints. So if I right-click a component, like anything in Fusion is a component. Technically, the top assembly is also a component, right? If I were to make headphones now, I would start by making a new component that is just like the headphone, and I would make that at one level below the top level, because that means I can move it around, I can do stuff with it. So it's always, I think it's good practice to always make one new component when you make stuff. So just right-click and select new component. That gives you this. Let's say I want to have one sketch that defines two different things, which will then become two different components. That could happen, right? So then I'll just make my sketch in this. This is highlighted by itself, so I'm just going to make this, and then maybe I'm going to make something round and something circular, like that. If I hit extrude, I can select those two profiles, and I can extrude. On the first time I get this dialog, I can select new component. If I select new component, then I will get oh, that was actually just one component. I don't really want that. That's not exactly what I wanted. I wanted these to be two separate ones. So let's not do that. Let's instead do new body. No, it's sort of, it's all failed now. I need to redo it. Yeah. Back to my sketch here. If I do the extrude operations and I want separate components for these two, then I let them be two separate bodies as I do the extrude. So that's new body. That's going to give two bodies down here, right? Then that should just not be there. Yeah. And then I can right click these two, and then I can select create components from bodies. And this is what I want, right? Because now I have like one sketch defining multiple bodies, which then in turn become components. And then the question is, okay, should you make them components right away? Should you wait? I think it's a good idea to make them components right away, as long as you don't have any top level of operation that sort of needs to be done to those two things, if that makes sense. Don't worry if you think it sounds complicated. I struggle with this too, but I also see that there are benefits to it. So now I have one top level component which houses another two components, right? So this could be, let's say that's, maybe this is my headphone. This is the right hand head speaker assembly. And maybe that contains also more components. That's perfectly okay. So I can also add another component to that. So it sort of gives you some sort of hierarchy, right? And then it can be quite hard to sort of determine what your hierarchy should look like. If your assembly is simple, let's say it's like 10 parts, you don't really need a hierarchy. You can just do like 10 separate components. That's totally fine. If you do headphones like this, it would be natural. Can I borrow that for a while? Yeah. It would be natural to split this and make a hierarchy. So you have like, this is the right-hand cup, that's the left-hand cup, and that's the head loop, right? So maybe I would just do two levels. So like head loop, also top level is headphone, that holds everything. Headphone includes the right-hand cup and the head loop, right? Then this includes all of the other junk. You don't have to like make a tree down here. You could, but you don't have to. And then this is like one component with a lot of parts in it, right? You could, of course, all the bodies can be components, but they don't have to like sort of be in a tree. They can just be like one level below. And then when you're done with this head cup, you just mirror the entire thing. And then you do some modifications to that mirror, like you can take off the buttons and things because you don't want buttons on both sides. Maybe you need to, yeah, different ways of doing that, but you mirror and then you sort of take out some features. That's probably easier than modeling separate right and left. I would not do that. I would make the complicated one first, and then I would take out features to simplify it to make the other side. Okay?